Hey, it's Mike from The Mike Wagner Show. Thanks for tuning in to The Mike Wagner Show on Anchor FM. If you're interested in sponsoring my show, you can send me an email to themikewagnershow@gmail.com, or you could also donate to the podcast. Just go to the Donate Listen site, and you can also donate whatever you like. Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. For those who are interested, Anchor can give you everything you need in one place for free, which you can use right from your phone or computer. We got creation tools, allows you to record and edit podcasts so it sounds great, and they'll distribute the podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere. Spotify, Apple, Google, many more. And you can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership. So download the Anchor app for free or go to Anchor FM to get started.
It's now time for the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. The Mike Wagner Show can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube, iTunes, Anchor FM, Radio Public, and themikewagnershow.com. Mike brings you great guests and interesting people from all across the globe. So sit back, relax, and enjoy another great episode of the Mike Wagner Show.
Hey everybody, it's Mike from The Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. Looking at a professional website without breaking your budget? Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today at 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show, get 10% off your first order. Sonic Web Studios, take your image to the next level. Also, the Mike Wagner Show can be heard on themikewagnershow.com. You can check our Facebook page at facebook.com/The Mike Wagner Show. You can download and listen on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Also on Anchor FM, Radio Public, iTunes, Google Play, Apple, Deezer, Stitcher, and more. Take the Mike Wagner Show with you on any mobile device. Subscribe to the Mike Wagner Show on the YouTube channel. Also, follow the Mike Wagner Show on Instagram and Twitter, and you can access the Mike Wagner Show on over 35 podcast platforms. We're here with author Tim Bakken, The Cost of Loyalty. He was a professor over at West Point, and the book is out right now on Amazon and talks about the culture that has taken place over at West Point, and he'll give you all the information on that, and talks about the wars in the U.S., Iran, Iraq, Vietnam, Afghanistan, the amount of spending in military, and also he also won a whistleblowing case against the U.S. military. He's one of the few civilians to do so. And live, ladies and gentlemen, from New York as well, too, the author of The Cost of Loyalty and talking about West Point, Tim Bakken. Tim, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Mike. Thanks very much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Well, you're very welcome, too. You're the author of The Cost of Loyalty. That's out on Amazon as well, too. And it talks about dishonesty, hubris, and the failure in the U.S. military. And you also talk about the numerous wars in the U.S. that from what I was reading, that they should have not been involved in the first place, and also spending on military. And you also won the whistleblowing case against the U.S. military, so you're one of the few to do so, and there's just been a lot that's been happening at West Point as well, too, in the book. And before we get into the book, tell us exactly how you got started over at West Point and how you began your career.
I grew up in Wisconsin, but eventually became a prosecutor in New York City in Brooklyn, and then after that eventually made my way into teaching and have been at West Point for the last 20 years where I remain. I became interested in writing this book and the concept of cost of loyalty because through my observations, it seemed to me that the military has begun to elevate loyalty over all other values, especially truth. In fact, loyalty is the number one Army value. But I started to look at the results of the wars in which the U.S. has been involved for the last 75 years, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And when we look at those places, we have to take an objective view of the military because despite our reverence and respect for the military, it's almost become too much like mere worship for the military institution. And I think that has caused us not to be critical of the results of America's military interventions. In those four wars, and a lot of people don't like to concede that America has lost wars, but even if we don't count those wars as losses and just say that they were instances where America did not achieve its goals, those places are probably more dangerous to America now than they were when the U.S. military intervened. Korea and at least North Korea and Vietnam are communist nations. They were supported by China, which is now the second most influential nation in the world. And Afghanistan is controlled more by the Taliban than the Americans. And Iraq is influenced more by Iran, another atomic threat to the United States and the Middle East, than by the United States. And once I looked at those wars and the current situations in those places, it occurred to me that we have to look at the military, not just at the politicians. We can't blame only the politicians. We can't blame only civilian leaders, because the military has received an enormous amount of support over all the years, $740 billion. And
wow.
therefore, $740 billion a year, and therefore we have to consider, why does America lose wars, or if that's a little bit too much for people to come to grips with, why does America not succeed in all of those wars in all of those places over 75 years?
Mm-hmm. And of course, it made me think about $740 million you spend on military, and how much do other countries spend on military? And that's what I'm kind of wondering about.
Well, that's a great point. The United States spends $740 billion.
Billion dollars, I'm sorry.
In current terms, but that's not even the whole picture, because that's the Department of Defense budget. But the Department of Energy controls the U.S. nuclear weapons, and there are other institutions like the security institutions in the United States, as well as the Veterans Department. And all told, the money that we spend on the military each year is about $1.2 trillion.
Wow.
And that amount is great, however, but just take the $740 billion for the Department of Defense each year. That is more money spent on the U.S. military than the other 12 nations combined. China is number 2, but all the other nations behind the United States, China, Russia, and all of the U.S. allies don't spend as much as the U.S. does each year.
I also noticed in one of the chapters that, I was reading as well, too, that the U.S. came in with superior equipment, but then you also had, China and Vietnam and the other countries came in with superior intelligence. So it sounds like that the intelligence pretty much outfoxed the superior equipment. It just raises the questions, about being all these wars, the last 75 years. And according to your book, that the last war we actually won was back in 1945, World War II. It's just like, I guess the point is like, why were we involved in these wars in the first place with Iran, Iraq, Vietnam, Afghanistan, when many times you wonder, it's like, why are we doing this in the first place?
It's almost overwhelming to think about, but the last general to win a war was Dwight Eisenhower, and he graduated from West Point in 1915 and was born in 1890. And yes, we might say that we won World War II, but certainly since then, things have not been very good. Over the past 75 years, the total number of years that America has been at war is 49. If we count Afghanistan separately, 19 in Afghanistan, 17 in Iraq, at least 10 in Vietnam, and many more years that we were involved in Vietnam before actual combat, and 3 in Korea. And none of those wars turned out very well for the United States. One of the things that is important, and which you mentioned, Mike, is that despite having superior weaponry, the greatest weaponry in the history of the world, and despite having all kinds of technical advantages, the U.S. military was not able to win in Korea, a country that North Korea at least did not have an air force, and in Vietnam, similarly, was relatively behind the times in weaponry. And in Iraq and Afghanistan, we have still not been able to win in those countries. And it came to be that we have to start asking, why is that? It can't be just because of bad political mistakes. It can't just be because the soldiers don't have enough weapons, because they do. They have an overwhelming number of weapons and powerful weaponry, but still we can't figure out a way to succeed. There's one bottom line, however, in the lack of success, and that is we have to consider whether the generals who lead American forces don't know how to win, or it might really be, and we don't know this, but it's possible that these situations, these wars were not wars that could be won in Korea and elsewhere. But if that is the case, if they could not be won, the people who needed to tell us that and who currently need to tell us that because we're still involved in Afghanistan and Iraq are the generals. But in all those wars, there has not been one general who has ever said while he or she was serving that we should not go into war in these countries or that we should abandon war in these countries. So either it's the generals can't win the wars that they have assumed that they could win, or they believe that the wars cannot be won, but they're not telling us. Mm-hmm. Either of those situations is very grave.
And do you think complacency might have set in after winning World War II, or do you think maybe the education has kind of gone downhill afterwards, maybe the 50s, the 60s, or 70s, or something like that? Or do you think it could be just simply pride overall that has just simply crept in after winning World War II?
What happened, and you've touched on all of the important reasons why we've had difficulty since World War II, is that the American military became separate from civilian society. And that especially happened during and after the Vietnam War. And there's one example, one famous Supreme Court case, and I say famous almost tongue-in-cheek because almost nobody has heard about it, and that was called Parker versus Levy from 1974. Mm-hmm. It's really instructive because it shows how the U.S. military wanted to separate from American society and American constitutional principles. Captain Levy was in the Army. He was a physician, a dermatologist, and he criticized the war in Vietnam. The Army prosecuted him, and he was convicted in a military court and sentenced to 3 years in prison. He appealed, saying that as a U.S. citizen, despite being a soldier, I have a right, a First Amendment right to free speech, and I can speak about what I believe is right or wrong about the Vietnam War. And it so happens that he was critical of the Vietnam War. Ominously, the Supreme Court in that case in 1974 decided for the Army and said, and these are not my words, they're the words of the Supreme Court, that the military is, quote, a separate society. As a separate society, it can, if it wants, take away the constitutional rights that everybody else enjoys of soldiers for what it called good order and discipline. As a result of that case and 2 or 3 other cases that occurred later in the 1980s, the military extracted itself firmly from American society. And now, despite what most people think, the military is controlled by Congress, and yes, it should be, but effectively, it has become a separate sovereign within the United States, almost a fourth branch of government. That was combined, that separateness was combined with a powerful public relations push by the military. And because Americans respect the military so much, and we all know that we need it and that we should respect it, but Americans reached a state where they now treat the military, many Americans, not everybody, as an entity that is beyond criticism, and that somebody who criticizes the military, and I'm not speaking from my perspective personally, but anybody who criticizes the military is characterized as not being supportive of the military instead of being characterized as someone who wants the best for her or his country.
Wow, that is something. We'll talk more about loyalty over truth and also the characteristics of the officers of military and more. You listen to The Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. Look at a professional website without breaking your budget. Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs at below the competition way. Call today at 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show. Get 10% off your first order. Sonic Web Studios. Take your image to the next level. Also, the Mike Wagner Show can be heard on the MikeWagnerShow.com. You can check our Facebook page at Facebook.com/The Mike Wagner Show. You can download and listen on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Also on Anchor FM, Radio Public, iTunes, Google Play, Apple, and more. Take the Mike Wagner Show with you on any mobile device. Subscribe to the Mike Wagner Show on the YouTube channel. Also follow the Mike Wagner Show on Instagram and Twitter today. We're here with Tim Bakken, the author of Cost of Loyalty, here on the Mike Wagner Show. He's a professor of law at West Point, and also we talked about the issues with the wars, the situation going on in West Point, and of course, loyalty over truth, which officially the Army's first value is loyalty from one soldier to next, not to nations and citizens. But it seems like that there's a lot of contradiction that takes place as well, too, that in the name of good order and discipline, suddenly took control of soldiers' lives.
Yes, soldiers have very few rights in the military, except those that are bestowed on them by the person who has the next highest rank. In the military, in regard to it, most people believe that it's an institution of discipline, but that's really not the case anymore, in the sense that because the military is no longer bound by the norms and the laws that bind civilians and everybody else in American society, what has happened is that the generals or the person who has the highest rank are the people who will be in control of everybody else below them. What this has created is a situation where nobody knows what he or she should do because you're dependent on the person of the next highest rank. Therefore, the most important thing to advance a career, one bad officer evaluation, one bad report can end a career, is to satisfy the needs and the wishes of the person above you. When you try to do that in the military or in any institution, when your focus is on satisfying a person, there will be a chaotic situation because people can never be satisfied. And that's why we have law, the rule of law. And that doesn't exist so much in the military. But what that means is that people are very reluctant, people inside the military, soldiers, officers, to speak up. They will not speak freely because they fear that they can be punished. I'll give one example from the Vietnam War that is very illustrative of this situation. The Army Chief of Staff from 1964 to 1968 was General Harold Johnson, a West Point graduate. He believed that General Westmoreland, who was the leader in Vietnam, leading general from 1964 to 1968, was fabricating the likelihood of winning the war. Everybody, or almost everybody, by the 1960s, the late 1960s, believed that the war was going poorly and it was unlikely that the United States would win. General Johnson, just before he died, said, "I wish when I was the Army Chief of Staff, I had gone into the president's office," the president at the time was Lyndon Johnson, "and given him my 4 stars, resigned, and told him that we cannot win the war and that we should withdraw." But General Johnson never did that, and near the end of his life, he said, "I will go to my grave with that moral lapse in judgment on my back." And he was, by most accounts, a good person and a good officer, but he could not bring himself to speak truthfully within the military chain of command to the president about something that very likely, if General Johnson had said it could have saved many soldiers' lives. And as a result, today, that reluctance to speak up inside the military continues. And there's no one who feels free to speak his or her mind. And as a result of that, we often don't know what's true or false. It's not always that somebody's lying. We just don't receive information about what's happening in the military or the likelihood of winning or losing a war. And as a result of that, we can't run our democracy without information. Democracy suffers because the military has become a separate sovereign, a near fourth branch of government that is not really controlled the way we would want it to be controlled by Congress, as in past days.
Mm-hmm. And he also mentioned about General MacArthur as well, too, questioning the Korean War as well, too, and he got relief of his duties, and it makes you wonder, was General MacArthur right about what he's doing? Is it more on loyalty over truth? And, of course, the whole MacArthur thing, it makes you wonder. It's like, what is really going on behind the scenes with General MacArthur?
That's a very interesting example because General MacArthur advocated using atomic weapons in the Korean War, and he was overruled by President Truman. Just in recent years, we've learned that General Westmoreland, he and General MacArthur were West Point graduates. They were the superintendents at West Point in their days, and that's the highest ranking officer and the leader of all the cadets at West Point. General MacArthur also advocated using nuclear weapons during the Vietnam War, but he was overruled by President Johnson. That's a good example of when civilian control of the military does exist in the way it should work. But nonetheless, despite having all those weapons, despite having what we believe is civilian control, we have not had military officers tell us. Well, first of all, we haven't had them successfully lead us into victories in the wars, but we also haven't had them tell us that we can't win the wars if the wars cannot be won. But as I say, and this is a kind of sad proof in the pudding, the wars have not turned out well. In those 4 wars over the last 75 years, 100,000 American soldiers have been killed. And in the places where the soldiers fought, where the U.S. military intervened, and nobody disagrees about the range, nobody's sure about the number, 3 to 6 million people in those countries died in those wars. But what have we produced? As I mentioned, Vietnam and North Korea are communist. Afghanistan is influenced more by the Taliban than the U.S., and Iraq is in turmoil.
Mm-hmm. Also made me think it, too, with the My Lai episode where they kill 1,000 women, children, and men, and yet the dysfunctional military justice system sentenced just one soldier to 3 years house arrest. And I thought about it, it's like, why would somebody just get 3 years when it could be like life in prison? Is it more like, I'm doing what the government says, or I'm doing it out of my conscience or ego? It kind of makes you wonder, reading about the My Lai incident, I thought I was in tears over that.
The military has its own penal law, its own legal code, and it prosecutes or doesn't prosecute soldiers. The examples that I gave in the book, and yours is the most significant one, Mike, are from No-Gun-Ri, which was a place in North Korea where U.S. soldiers killed several hundred civilians. Nobody knows for sure the number. And in Vietnam, another great number, up to 500 civilians were killed, mostly women and children. And then in Haditha, Iraq, soldiers killed probably about 24 civilians. I use those 3 examples because the number of civilians killed totaled about 1,000. And in those 1,000 deaths, only one soldier, as you noted, William Kelly, an Army lieutenant, was prosecuted for a homicide, and he ended up serving only 3 years of house arrest after it was all said and done, along with several months in detention. That shows that the military is not able or is unwilling to prosecute soldiers for the acts that they've committed. Nobody disagrees that there were killings in No Gunri in North Korea. It was actually in South Korea, but they were of North Koreans who were civilian North Koreans who were fleeing into South Korea, and civilians in My Lai and civilians in Haditha. But the military justice system failed in those instances, and only one person was held to account.
Mm-hmm. It also makes you think of some of the other generals, supposedly held accountable but got away with it, and also, I guess with the training that goes on in West Point as well, too, where it had one of the most superior trainings and had gone downhill. We'll talk about that, but first listen to The Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. Look at a professional website without breaking your budget. Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs at below the competition way. Call today at 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show. Get 10% off your first order. Sonic Web Studios. Take your image to the next level. Also, the Mike Wagner Show can be heard on the MikeWagnerShow.com. You can check our Facebook page at facebook.com/the Mike Wagner Show. You can download and listen on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Also on Anchor FM, Radio Public, iTunes, Google Play, Apple, and more. Take the Mike Wagner Show with you on any mobile device. Subscribe to the Mike Wagner Show on the YouTube channel. Also follow the Mike Wagner Show on Instagram and Twitter today. We're here with author Tim Bakken of The Cost of Loyalty on the Mike Wagner Show. He's a professor over at West Point University, and we talked about the things that happen in the military, the wars, the cost, and what's happening at North Korea, Vietnam, and why we're in these wars. And of course, you also had the officers that were trained over at West Point, and they also had some they were taught truth, but then they're also taught to fabricate. And this has also been started up like with the downhill, like say after the 50s, you won the war. And one of the examples I could figure out is General Petraeus for releasing documents just because to impress his lover. It's like what happened to the honesty and credibility he was taught over at West Point.
West Point has a motto of duty, honor, country, and a cadet shall not lie, cheat, or steal. Those are important principles, but you've raised a very interesting point, and I'll give a couple examples with regard to the military academies about how fabrication exists, and this will be interesting to anybody who is thinking about colleges or who has a child in college or one who might be in college. What happens at the military academies is that they focus on leadership, which is very important, of course, and they have a role in American society, but I've said that role should be reformulated. They should be national universities where people of civilian background and people who are interested in the military should be allowed to attend, but on the basis of merit, not on the basis of inside dealing, and not on the basis because people want to become athletes and play college athletics in college. What the military academies do is really recalibrate the admission system. They will say that somebody is an applicant, and the word applicant is important. It's a term of art and also a legal term, who is interested in a military academy and or who comes to a camp in his or her junior year of high school. They will count that person as an applicant because they, quote, start a file on that particular person. What that means is that they will inflate the number of applicants that want to attend the military academies. Somebody who attends a camp or writes away for information is not an applicant. The Department of Education said as that applicant is somebody who really applies and who's accepted, rejected, or is put on a waiting list. By counting all of those phantom high school students as applicants, the military academies make it seem as though their admissions and acceptance rates are very low. For example, they will say that they have 10,000 applicants in a particular year, but they count as applicants, and this is not the way to do it, according to anybody, especially the Department of Education, anyone on whom they started a file. That's just somebody who attended a summer camp or who expressed an interest. In reality, the military academies, while they're claiming acceptance rates of 9 to 11% every year, will have an acceptance rate of above 50% every year.
Wow.
That is to say, the number of actual applicants will only be 2,000 or 2,500, and they will have to admit probably 1,400 or 1,500 of those real applicants to get an incoming class of 1,200. That's an acceptance rate of 50% or higher. I give the example in the book of West Point that had acceptance rates in a 10-year period of 56% to 70%.
Oh my goodness.
Not the 9 or 10 or 11 or sometimes 12% acceptance rates that the academies are claiming. That is the kind of tomfoolery and shadiness that occurs, and that goes through the entire military. In the second example, if I have time, Mike, I can give this example also, is of a study done by the Army War College, which is a place that trains Army officers who will go on to take the highest ranks. They will train lieutenant colonels and colonels at the Army War College for a year, and then they expect them to take leadership positions, the highest leadership positions in the Army. Two former colonels who were working at the Army War College, and they're still there, did a study where they said that the most difficult problem with the Army in particular is that there's dishonesty throughout the ranks. And that dishonesty, they said, is not limited to the kind of dishonesty that I just expressed at the military academies about the acceptance rates, but it's the dishonesty that goes with everybody in the military and into actual combat situations. They thought, well, maybe this dishonesty will not occur in more critical circumstances, but what they said in their study is that they found that it actually does occur and that it is widespread inside the U.S. Army.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a problem with the U.S. Army, as mentioned as well, too. Was there also problems running rampant, like say with the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines as well, too, and the Coast Guard?
There are three military academies: the U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. There's a merchant academy also. Those are two federal academies, but I don't talk about those very much. I talk about the military academies, which are controlled by the Department of Defense, and there are three: West Point for the Army, the Navy Academy for the Navy, that's in Annapolis, Maryland, and the Air Force Academy for the Air Force, which is in Colorado Springs, Colorado. What I'm saying, and I've described it in the book, is that there are these kinds of problems at all the military academies. Not only dishonesty, but also problems of severe and significant violence. The example that I use in the book, and that is relevant, is in regard to sexual assault. A Department of Justice study from 2013, in looking at all colleges in the United States, all civilian colleges in the United States, concluded that the rate of women who are sexually assaulted at colleges each year, the rate of women at colleges each year, is 6.1 women out of every 1,000.
Wow.
However, the military academies do not have to report their numbers to the public under something that's called the Clery Act, which all other colleges have to do. But because sexual assault became such a critical problem in the military and at the military academies, Congress passed a law that required the Pentagon and the military academies to produce reports on sexual assaults there. What those reports show, and the military and the Pentagon will say that you can't compare apples and oranges, the military academies with the civilian colleges. But I did that. I was able to look at the studies in more details that the Pentagon, when it releases its studies, does not provide. And it showed that women students at the military academies suffer much greater sexual assault. That is to say, out of every 1,000 women at the military academies, over 30 of them will suffer sexual assault each year. That compares to 6.1% in civilian colleges, 30 per 1,000 in the military academies, 6 per 1,000 at civilian colleges. That's a 5 times greater likelihood at the military academies of a woman student being sexually assaulted. That's a grave problem, and the military academies have tried to address the problem, but they've been incapable of doing it so far. And I believe there are 2 reasons for that. One reason is that people are being admitted who should not be admitted, but the second reason is that the military academies no longer reflect civilian values, and they are no longer guided by the values that create excellence in civilian society. The military academies continue to be extremely authoritarian places where fear is a prime motivator, where students, seniors will control juniors, juniors will control sophomores, and so on. And in that kind of culture, that kind of authoritarian culture where people have almost complete control over people who are below them in rank, there will inevitably be violence and abuse. In the book, I've explained how this occurs, and I explain how this kind of system should be abandoned. It's not a modern system, and it has not helped us in our conflicts around the world over the past 75 years.
Mm-hmm. And there's also some cronyism involved as well, too, according to the book, and that appeared to be rampant as well, too, cronyism.
I've talked about favoritism and cronyism, yes, and a primary example is the academies. Cronyism exists throughout the military. That is, you have to please somebody above you in rank to move on. But I take a closer look at the military academies. Over the last 200 years, in looking at West Point, the superintendent, who's a 3-star general, the commandant, who's a 1-star general, the commandant controls the daily activities of the cadet, and the dean controls the academic activities of the cadet. Over the last 200 years, there have been 150 commandants, superintendents, and deans. That is the 3 people who control everything at the academies. 145 of them out of 150 at West Point have themselves been graduates of West Point. That makes it a situation where groupthink develops, and it becomes impossible to have any change from the outside because the students are learning from people who graduate from West Point. The students graduate, they come back to teach at West Point, they go back into the Army for a time, and then they come back to West Point to become the superintendents, commandants, and deans. That's a situation that is rife for inside dealing, and it creates a situation where it's very difficult, impossible almost, to bring in new oxygen from the outside. And as a result, things done at the military academies today are the kinds of things that were done at West Point in the 1800s. And I describe this in regard to the curriculum and other facets of West Point.
hmm And also, we'll talk about the whistleblowing case you had. You're one of the few civilians to do so. But first, listen to The Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. Look at a professional website without breaking your budget. Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today at 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to support at sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show, get 10% off your first order. Sonic Web Studios, take your image to the next level. Also, the Mike Wagner Show can be heard on themikewagnershow.com. You can check our Facebook page at facebook.com/The Mike Wagner Show. You can download and listen on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Also on Anchor FM, Radio Public, iTunes, Google Play, Apple, and more. Take the Mike Wagner Show with you on any mobile device. Subscribe to the Mike Wagner Show on the YouTube channel. Also follow the Mike Wagner Show on Instagram and Twitter. You can catch the Mike Wagner Show on over 35 podcast platforms. We're here with author Tim Bakken, The Cost of Loyalty, here on the Mike Wagner Show. He's a professor over at West Point, and we talked about numerous things like loyalty over truth, the characteristics of officers in the military, the scandals, emission fabrication, sexual assault, and more. And of course, you're also one of the few civilians to actually win a whistleblowing case against the U.S. military. And you can just tell us about that historic event.
In 2011, I reported up the chain of command at West Point what I believed were corrupt practices occurring at West Point. To make a long story short, I was immediately retaliated against, and that's not my saying that. You can go online, your listeners can, and find that by the head of the Department of Law, who was an attorney and in charge of the Department of Law. But what happened in that case is that I took a case to something called the U.S. Merit Systems Protection Board, and I won. That is, it wasn't I who determined that I was retaliated against. It was another federal agency. And as a result of that, that agency issued an order to the Army. The case was titled Tim Bakken versus the Army, which I eventually won, telling West Point not to retaliate against me. That's a personal instance, but it's significant not because of what happened to me. And the retaliation continued, but I learned that, and everybody in the military knows that this is the kind of thing that can occur, and very few people have the wherewithal to pursue a remedy the way I did. The most important thing about this, though, is that it's a situation that's not isolated to West Point or any one military academy. It's happened to professors at the other military academies also, but it's something that exists throughout the military. Mike, you mentioned I mentioned No Gun Ri. You mentioned My Lai massacre in the Vietnam War. This was a situation where retaliation is a situation in the military where somebody who works with you every day reaches out and for no reason, because you told the truth. If I hadn't told the truth about what I believed, if I didn't have a reasonable basis for what I believed, then I would have been off kilter in some way. But I had a reasonable basis for telling what I believed was corruption at West Point. Because I did that, I was retaliated against. And if someone is willing to retaliate against a coworker, another person who voluntarily works for the government and is working on behalf of the Army and the Department of Defense, then what will that person be willing to do in war to people who are our adversaries? That is to say, we do depend on the military to win wars, although the military has not been successful for 75 years, but we also expect the military to fight according to the laws of war. But if people in the military are learning that it's okay to hurt each other, whether through a retaliatory measure, just hurting somebody because it feels good, or it might be sexual assault or other kinds of abuse, then what will those kinds of people do in other situations? And it has a national security implication, because when the military goes off kilter, when somebody does something wrong, then that provides an opportunity for America's adversaries to say, look, America is really not so good. The military is really not very nice. And that allows the people against whom America has been fighting to have a great recruiting tool. And we saw that with regard to soldiers' abuse of people at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, with regard to the My Lai massacre, with regard to even how prisoners at Guantanamo Bay are treated by the U.S. military. So the import of my case was that it was representative of what occurs in the military. And as a result of that, I've described in detail in the book what the remedy should be for that kind of retaliation. It simply should end. But it has become pervasive, not only in the military, but that kind of military ethos. And I think everybody listening will have a feel for this, has become pervasive in civilian society as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's a fascinating point. You also brought up, Tim, as well, too. And, just some other important points on the book as well, too. Like, say, we talked about, Ari, with the behavior, the fabrications, shoddy teaching, and whatever else. And I guess, I'm just going to throw this out there. Like, if you were to run West Point, what changes would you make?
I'll try to address that first with an example, because you mentioned teaching. At West Point and the two other military academies, Navy and Air Force, 50% of the students major in engineering. Engineering is a great discipline. There are a lot of brilliant people in it, and we need a lot of engineering. But you can ask any officer, the work of military officers today, especially in Afghanistan and Iraq and on the ground, requires critical thinking, not knowledge of hardware. Contractors do most of the engineering work for the military these days. Engineering was important in the 1800s because Army officers were used to develop the railroads in America, but that's not what they're doing anymore. We need more critical thinking in the military. Once I made an argument to somebody who was the second in charge of an engineering department at West Point. The way it works at the military academies is that lower-ranking officers come to the military academies. They work for 2 or 3 years there, and then they leave. 60% of the teachers at the military academies are part-timers, 1 or 2 or 3 year people who then leave. It's a tremendous turnover rate, which is costly to any kind of organization. I told this colonel who was second in command that I thought even the short-term teachers, instructors at the military academies, especially West Point, should be entitled to do things that would develop them as professional teachers. And he said, no, all they have to do, all that I want them to do is go to class and teach. And he described how he wanted them to use the same color chalk when they were saying the same thing about the same topic in different classrooms at the same time. These are teachers who don't have any autonomy, who are told what to teach, and they're not only told what to teach, but how to teach, and the micromanaging is so detailed that they're told what color chalk to use when they're talking about a particular problem or a particular issue. This is not a modern education at all, and I believe it should be reformed massively. And so what I've advocated is that the military academies should be turned into national universities, and they should be controlled just like the Constitution anticipated by civilians, and people should be admitted on the basis of merit, not because the military academies want to win football games or athletic matches. 25 to 30% of the students who are admitted solely because they play a sport. And then after 4 years of college, the people who attend those national military academies, if they want to go into military service, they would have to spend 1 additional year training in the nuts and bolts of their particular military discipline, Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marines. I think that's a model that's more modern. It would bring a wider variety of students from America into the military academies, and we would be stronger for it.
That sounds interesting, too. And just a couple more things with you, Tim, and one more question I just kind of popped in my mind. What if you use the wrong color chalk? What would they do to you? That's the thing. Different color chalk? Oh, my gosh.
Yes.
What would they do to you? Like slap you, fine you, or make you go in the corner? It's like, what do they do?
It's really quite unbelievable, but it really does occur. And you can today go down an aisle of classrooms and you can see instructors teaching the same class, and at the same time they will have the same PowerPoint slide on, and they might be using the same color chalk. They don't resist because they learn that if they do, they can have a career ended. An OER, an officer's evaluation report, is performed on each officer by that officer's commander every single year. One comment, like he was disobedient or he was insubordinate, would end an officer's career. He would not get promoted, or certainly he would have a dead end in his career. And one example I can give about how that occurs is the following. In the military penal code, which is called the Uniform Code of Military Justice, they have their own penal code for soldiers. There is a provision that says soldiers can be prosecuted for, quote, disrespect. Then there's another provision under that says truth is not a defense. So even if that soldier, that teacher, who was using the wrong color chalk, said to his commander, "Colonel, I should have the right to use a different color chalk or to use a different method of teaching because my research shows that my method is better than using the same color chalk at the same color time." Even if he was correct, that officer, and he should be doing some other method instead of the color chalk method, if he said it disrespectfully. And who determines whether it's disrespectfully? It's the commander of the commander. Then he could be prosecuted for a crime.
Oh, my gosh.
Nobody knows this. Almost nobody knows this. But it's not an independent prosecutor in the military who issues criminal charges. It's the commander of a military base. That commander has complete discretion as to whether or not to determine whether to prosecute somebody for disrespect or anything else. And also what people don't know as well is that that commander is the one who determines who the jurors will be. He or she, the commander, handpicks the jurors who will be presiding over the trial of the soldier who the commander has decided to prosecute. No matter how good a person the commander might be, that creates an enormous conflict of interest because the commander always has a personal interest in what's happening in her or his post, military post, and therefore there will always be at least an unconscious bias about whether the commander wants somebody to be prosecuted or not prosecuted, to be found guilty or not guilty. But that's what has happened because the military has become separate from civilian society, and it's an entity unto itself, almost unaccountable in effect to civilian influence.
Oh, my goodness. That was just unbelievable. And I suppose you probably get court-martialed for saying the New York Yankees stink or the Giants are going to lose.
Well, I don't know about that. I think you probably could say who your favorite team is, but you couldn't say it with disrespect even if your team was better than the Commander's team. You always have to say it with... I'll just say you always have to say it keeping in mind what could happen to you if you say something that is not liked by the person who controls you.
well, I'm sure we'll supposedly keep on mind that one. Tim Bakken, The Cost of Loyalty, thank you very much for your time once again. And I do have another question, though. Will there be another book in the works after this one?
I'm not sure, but I'm always open to the prospect, I suppose. It depends on how much information is out there and whether I think I can make another contribution to making the military a little bit better. And this is what I will try to do, is just to make my small contribution as a teacher. But I think it's important. It's important for all of us to speak up when we can. I know it's extremely difficult, and a lot of people find that they have to make cost-benefit decisions in their lives and that they cannot speak up. But as we all know, keeping something inside can be very anxiety-producing, and it doesn't lead to peace of mind. I would say to people, your listeners, I'd say to people in the military, if you find that you've lost your peace of mind, if you have that anxiety that comes from fearing what might be the repercussions of saying something or doing something that is deemed to be improper by the person above you, then it might be time to make an adjustment. But I know from personal experience, it's very difficult to speak up, but it's also something that does create some peace of mind in the end.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very good thing. Once again, Tim Bakken, the author of Cost of Loyalty. Tell us, how can they purchase the book? What's your website, and how do people contact you?
The book can be purchased, as you said, Mike, on Amazon and at Bloomsbury, the publisher, and of course at Barnes & Noble. And I can be contacted through Twitter or Facebook and all the usual ways. And I'd be glad to hear from people. I really appreciate it very much.
All right, that's no problem. Once again, Tim Bakken, The Cost of Loyalty, here on the Mike Wagner Show. Tim, a big thank you for your time. You've been fantastic, very insightful. Looking forward to having you on soon. Do us a favor, keep this up to date. We'll love you back on sometime later in 2020 or beyond.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. The Mike Wagner Show can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Anchor FM, Radio Public, and themikewagnershow.com. Please support our program with your donations at themikewagnershow.com. Join us again next time for another great episode of The Mike Wagner Show.